Right, well, good afternoon, and thanks to the organisers for the invitation to speak briefly about a project that I've begun recently. The main impetus for revisiting Horsehope was a much more recent discovery, the so-called Peebles hoard, which made national news in August 2020 in the middle of lockdown. Marius, who you see here, and a couple of his friends were metal detecting in a field not far from Peebles. I'm afraid the site is being kept secret for the foreseeable future. When he discovered some unusual bronze rings. Recognising that they might be of interest, Marius very responsibly resisted the temptation to dig further and contacted the Scottish Treasure Trove unit. Excavation by a team from the museum then revealed the outline of a pit containing what proved to be a hoard of Bronze Age artefacts. Owing to the complexity of the find, as you can see, the decision was taken to lift the entire pit in a block of soil for micro-excavation in the NMS laboratories. And I'll come back to the Peebles hoard towards the end. So, as I say, that was the impetus for revisiting an extraordinary find, another hoard of late Bronze Age metalwork found in 1864 on the rocky screes of Horsehope Craig in the Manor Valley, Peeblesshire. And as you can see on the map, we're just to the southwest of Peebles, about 2/3 of the way down the valley of the Manor Water. Now, in addition to two socketed axe heads, which are, even by the late 19th century, were a well-known type in Scotland, the collection of at least 30 items included a series of distinctive cast rings, hollow cast on a clay core, which mostly are gathered at the bottom of the slide, some disc-shaped mountings and ribbed discs, which are up from them, as well as other mountings and moulded strips of various shapes, sizes, and completeness, which really defied ready explanation. Now, apart from one axe head, which was later donated to the National Museum, the entire find was presented to the Peebles Museum, housed in the Chambers Institute, which you see on the lower left. In the course of an still extremely useful survey of local museums in Scotland, the then director of the Society of Antiquaries of Scotland Museum, Joseph Anderson on the left in that top slide, and his assistant, George Black, carried out a survey of material in local collections in Scotland. They recognised the hoard's unusual nature and published some of the more unusual pieces in the report on their survey, but they were unable to offer an interpretation of the various mountings and fittings. Thereafter, really, the Horsehope hoard remained largely overlooked until it came to the attention of Stuart Piggott, Professor Stuart Piggott, who in the early 50s had only recently arrived to take up the chair of archaeology in the University of Edinburgh. In addition to a summary catalogue in addition to illustrating and cataloguing the contents in a bit more detail for the first time, Stuart set the find in the wider context of the European late Bronze Age. And most importantly, he recognised that the hoard was largely made up of horse harness and the components of a wheeled vehicle, or more than one wheeled vehicle, obviously disassembled, and specifically invited comparison with the fittings known from high-status wagon or cart burials in Central Europe. This rather murky early artist reconstruction comes from a pre-war Czech publication, which was in the fashion of the time, printed on what really just feels like toilet paper these days, really grim paper. So it's difficult to get a good image, but it conveys the sort of wooden vehicle that he was envisaging, obviously much better known from the burial context in Europe, and seeing those metal fittings as embellishments to that wooden structure. Now, in our project, obviously, nearly 70 years on, what was already an internationally significant deposit is in clear need of reappraisal. So, aided by modern analytical techniques, which wouldn't have been available to Stuart in the 50s, such as X-raying, optical microscopy, and metal analyses, we're going to be, the aim of the project basically is to address all aspects of the hoard afresh, ranging from reconsideration of the contents through to the circumstances of its discovery and its landscape setting, really to try and prepare a new fully illustrated catalogue. And this is being work we're doing in conjunction with Chris Soares of Peebles Museum. Sorry, before I leave that, so basically I don't want to spend too much time on the individual items. As I say, this is really a trailer of a project that's really just got off the ground, but we're looking at aspects of the metalwork that weren't considered by Stuart. Things like the casting technology in more detail, trying to assess whether the damage was done in antiquity or as a post-discovery. And in some cases, for example, the big heavy mounting at the bottom left, it looks as though it's been reused in antiquity with fresh nail holes or rivet holes punched through what may have been already a damaged fitting. So that's what we're doing with just very briefly, what we're doing with the finds. We're also looking at the landscape context. Now, for as long as I've been aware, no one knew exactly where on Horsehope Craig the hoard had been discovered, and certainly Canmore only allocates a six-figure grid reference. But in the course of doing some background research, I realised that the answer had been there really in plain sight since the 1880s, when the hoard first turned up. David Christison, who was a pioneering field worker, who is in the, he was a doctor. That's him on the lower right, seated at the lower right as you view the slide. That's him in the Royal Infirmary with some of his colleagues prior to going off to fight, to work as a medic in the Crimean War. But he was injured, and to recuperate took up field work, and to our good fortune. So we're I'll press on, I think, in view of the time. So basically, we using what almost amounts to a Treasure Island map then, because Christison actually marks on his sketch of the hill the find spot. Strat Halliday and I, Strat's in the audience, went up to Horsehope earlier this year to have a look at and quartered the hilltop until we found that Christensen was really not very far wide of the mark at all, and discovered a small, what's described as a cairn that was supposedly erected, said to have been erected by the landowner following the discovery of the find. Now the find was made as a result of a shepherd spotting the bronzes in the upcast from rabbit or fox disturbance, and that resulted in the discovery of the material under a large stone. Later this year, back in the summer, with one of our members, David Bartholomew, we did some metal detecting on the site, but unfortunately all that produced was some cartridge caps, but not modern ones, probably of some age. But that was in the summer. The vegetation was high, and we're planning to go back next year and do further metal detecting. Stuart Piggott described the site as desolate, and I suspect he was never actually in the Manor Valley. It's clear from his paper that the objects were brought to Edinburgh and that he examined them there. Christensen did discover a number of sites in the immediate area, but opposite Horsehope Craig, in particular opposite Horsehope Craig, the later prehistoric enclosure at the bottom left there. But as a result of field work and more recently analysis of the LiDAR data, Strat Halliday again has been able to show that an extensive area of the lower slopes of Possil Craig, opposite, this is the view from Horsehope, but looking across the valley, those lower slopes retain extensive traces of settlement, field systems, and clearance cairns. And while there's currently no dating evidence at Possil, recent excavations in nearby Glenrath, only a couple of kilometres away, by AOC a number of years ago, did reveal evidence of Bronze Age settlement around about the middle of the second millennium BC. So rather than just being a metalwork deposit in the middle of nowhere, the chances are that deposition of the Horsehope hoard took place within what we might describe as a cultural landscape. It would have been a familiar occupied landscape. So to draw things to a close, just a quick peek again at the Peebles hoard. Since 2020, the hoard has been gradually excavated from its block in a project coordinated by Dr. Matt Knight of the National Museum. And he tells me, it's thanks to him that we've got this sneak peek at what was the contents of the hoard, and the slide on the lower left is really just a small selection. Thanks to the micro-excavation process, if you include all the organic material as well, I think there's a total of some 600 recorded items come out of the pit. But this is the sort of pick of the more complete bronze work. And as you can see, it's quite a selection of material. At the time it was found, the press releases were proclaiming that it was horse harness. Well, there was a sword and horse harness. I think Matt is more ambivalent about that now, and the jury's still out. But I think this is really here just to say watch this space. The hoard is coming up for allocation through the treasure trove process next spring. And I think from now on, I think Matt is probably starting to give talks, I believe possibly one in Berwick quite soon. So I think more and more information will be coming out about the Peebles hoard in the near future. to draw things to a close, the Horsehope, sorry, before I leave that slide, I should also point out that in the middle of the group from Peebles hoard, you can see a sort of what's known as a rattle pendant, and that's the only object in the hoard at the moment that Matt feels confident is connected with horse harness. And the illustration on the right shows a reconstruction based on a Welsh find, which at the moment is the closest parallel to the Peebles group of material. Sort of jingle jangles, rattle pendants, decorative fittings added to a bridle set. And finally, I just want to sum up by saying that the Horsehope material invites us to consider these finds on a much wider national and international stage. For the late Bronze Age in Scotland, the burial record remains very restricted, and therefore the potential for ancient DNA analysis remains correspondingly limited. So we're still heavily dependent on artifact studies as a source of proxy evidence for understanding interregional and long-distance contacts along the Atlantic facade and also across the North Sea to continental Europe. These are just some examples of hoards or reconstructions based on hoards from Britain, France on the bottom right, and Denmark on the bottom left. Really just to show that we're in a period and setting of long-distance contacts. So along with weaponry and feasting equipment, vehicle fittings and horse gear are one of the sort of hallmark types that appear to mark connections between elites, and they beg questions, obviously, concerning issues ranging from social relations through to the nature of transportation, the nature of movement, and also the transfer of technologies. These are probably not direct links between different areas. They're sort of interpretations of international ideas. But for now, and that idea of the long association of equestrianism and equestrian activities with status is the one that we can follow probably from the late Bronze Age right through into modern times. That long association with aristocracy, for example. But at the end of a long conference day, it's really one of Prince Philip's pithier remarks that seemed appropriate to bring to your attention. And that's my cue to stop. So.